Welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host and author, Ron Ovitt. I'm so glad you're with us today. Today we're on session 10. We're going to be talking about unhealthy attachments. Now, we started last week on our series about attachments. Now, attachment is simply a relationship, right? The bonding that we have with our caregivers. It could be a love bond, it could be a fear bond, but the way that we respond to the situation that we live in, where we're being brought up, causes us to have certain beliefs. And we need to have a certain safety, right? We want to look at how maybe negative early childhood relationships create that non-secure attachment. Now, what's that mean? It means that attachment is simply whether, it's your parents, or I call it caregivers, right? Maybe you're in a blended family, you were adopted. They're there to be the secure base. And so, for example, a child, you ever watch them when they first learn to walk? They walk away from the parents, right? Maybe they're holding on to something. They turn around and look, make sure things are okay. Then they walk a little farther. Then they, look back. Maybe they fall and they look up and mom comes, gets them. Mom provides this secure base to go away from and come back to. We have this rhythm. That's how we grow. We go from independent to dependent, independent to dependent, and that becomes a secure base. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes perhaps there's neglect, or there's abuse, or there's all kinds of things that cause a child not to have that security, not to have that safety, not to feel good. And as a result, they start having beliefs about the world and about themselves. And it's usually about themselves. But more than that, their brain starts to react to what is dangerous. What is dangerous. And so it starts setting off alarms and causes anxiety, can cause all kinds of things. And so that's what we want to look at today. The last lesson we talked about healthy attachments. Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson have written a book called The Power of Showing Up. And they said this: parenting is hard, and lots of children are struggling these days because of anxiety, busy schedules, screen time, parental distractions, or something else. What does the research say can make the biggest difference in kids' lives? Well, they said this: when a caregiver shows up for them, when he shows up for them and offers the 4 S's, helping them feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. That's the 4 S's of attachment, according to them. And what was it? Being safe, right? Being seen, being soothed and secure. That creates this healthy attachment. But unfortunately, some of us grew up with unhealthy attachments. And what happens then? In his new book called Darkness, Dr. Lawrence Hedges shares some of the fears that come out of early, unhealthy attachments. He says a century of psychoanalytic research has yielded 4 main watersheds of relational development, each with its own relational fears. That's fears that come out of relationships. Anyone subjected to overwhelming neglect, abuse, terror, intimidation, or shame during any one of the earliest phases of life is vulnerable to having similar overwhelming levels of fear, constriction, and/or fragmentation triggered by intimate relationships and/or perceived interpersonal demands later in life. Now, you may want to read that again, but it's a mouthful, I get it, but it's really, really right on. And so they divided into those 4 things, watersheds. He says the first is the organizing experience. That's prenatal up to 4 months. And we talked last time about, children know what's pleasant and what's unpleasant. And as a result, they could have low energy or high energy, but it's that pleasantness. Is this pleasant or unpleasant? And the brain picks that up. It doesn't want to go toward unpleasant experiences, right? And it will protect us from that. It will cause an alarm to go off. It will cause us to behave in certain ways. You touch a hot stove, even a child, it won't go near it again, right? Hopefully. Well, the symbiotic experience, that's 4 months to 2 years old, symbiotic means, living in close physical approximation, okay? An association with each other. And so living together, right, that's a symbiotic relationship, the child and the parents. Well, if the child, has an unhealthy attachment and those things are happening, then there's a fear of abandonment. I grew up with that fear of abandonment and that fear of self-assertion, not sure that you can be yourself. Those are huge. And a lot of times parental care causes that, right? We know how to make our children behave, and if they, get out of line, we stop them. Well, that can be good, but it also can be bad if it's misused, right? And then there's the self-other experience, 2 to 3 years old, and that's more social. That's who am I in relationship to you? And we have that part of the brain where we start learning socially. And in that case, there can be that fear of being unacceptable, right? That's social anxiety type of experiences. And then there's the independent experience. That's 3 years through adolescence. And that's where social learning comes in as well. And then later rational learning. But the social learning, how do I get along? And so pretty soon we start judging ourselves by other people's standards. And so there can be that fear of failure or fear of success. I know I wrestled with that one. That was always confusing to me. And I had to work on that. Fear of failure is one thing. Why are you afraid of success? And there can also be the fear of being fully alive, being who I really am. And those things can get squelched in us. And so those are some of the things that can come out of this unhealthy attachments. Now, as a result of that, we get different kinds of attachment styles, and we'll be getting more into that in the lessons to come. But there was a website, School of Life, and they had talked about this research that went out, and it went crazy. Millions of people saw the research. It was a questionnaire, started out in a newspaper, and then it went around the world basically, and it said, circle the description that best describes your relationship style. And A was, I find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. I often worry that my partner doesn't really love me or won't want to stay with me. I want to get very close to others, and this sometimes scares people away. Are you like that? I know I wrestled with that. I know early on I would ask my wife, do you really love me? That insecurity there, right? Or maybe it's B. I find it relatively easy to get close to others, and I am comfortable depending on them and having them depend on me. I don't worry about being abandoned or about someone getting too close to me. Now perhaps you're there. Or C. I am somewhat uncomfortable being close to others. I find it difficult to trust them completely, difficult to allow myself to depend on them. I'm nervous when anyone gets too close, and often others want me to be more intimate than I feel comfortable being. Well, which one is you? You can look these over, and I encourage you to read these notes over and then go into the group discussions questions. Really get into this. Don't just listen to this video, but read it for yourself and ask yourself, which one are these? Option A is known as an anxious attachment. It's an anxious attachment where we long to be intimate with others, but is continuously scared of a letdown, or often precipitates a crisis, in relationships through counterproductive, more aggressive behavior. And so it causes problems, right? The second, B, is what is known more as a secure attachment, whereby love and trust come easily. And the good news is, and we'll get into this, is that we can go from unsecure, we can go from A and end up being like B, and that's what's happened in my life. Because of the relationship I had with my wife over time, I learned to trust more. I learned that I could be myself, that I could have ruptures and repair them, and we still have a healthy relationship, and it's really changed the way I am with people. Now, option C refers to the avoidant type of attachment, where it feels much easier to avoid the dangers of intimacy and be more by myself. And so again, I encourage you to read this. I know that some of this is new vocabulary. I know it's using words in the way you're not used to, but that's okay. We'll get used to it, right? It's like learning anything else. But this is important because we want to understand, why are we behaving the way? How are we going to talk to God about it? How are we going to pray about it? How are we going to have fellowship and discuss these things if we don't understand some of the reasons why we behave and feel the way we do? Dr. Wendy Walsh says this: everyone has a certain kind of internal attachment style or relationship style based on genetic predisposition and the kind of parenting we received as infants and toddlers. In a nutshell, the theory is this: if a child's basic emotional and physical needs are met by a consistent primary attachment figure, that child has a good chance of growing up to love themselves, to trust people, to trust love, and to seek out partners who actually help him or her recreate that familiar feeling of mother love. Attachment theorists refer to these lucky lovers as having the ability to securely attach. Unfortunately, she says, people who fall in this attachment category only make up about 20% of American population. The rest of us are filled with anxiety and or avoidance about emotional intimacy. Now, I've heard different percents. She's actually 20% is one of the lower ones I've heard, but nevertheless, the chances are many of us struggle with this. And the problem is it causes our amygdala, right, that limbic part of our brain, the guard shack, if you will, to be oversensitive sometimes. Why oversensitive? Because it's being sensitive that something that doesn't make any sense anymore. For example, if you were a toddler and you went to the water to play, and Dad's saying, you know, don't go near the water, and Mom's saying, okay, be careful, and your siblings are saying, come on in. You go in and you're real little, a wave comes in, knocks you over, you get water in your mouth and you're coughing. That would have been traumatic enough, but you know, Mom starts yelling, Dad's there, why'd you go near the water? The siblings are teasing, and you hear about it over and over. Well, as a toddler, you may have had a good, scary reaction to that, a healthy one. Boy, I shouldn't have went near the water. But what happens when you're 4 or 5 or 6, or maybe 7 or 8, and now you're up here and the water's only up to your ankle? If you're still scared of the water, that means the amygdala still remembers, hey, water, danger. That's irrational at that point, you see. As a toddler, it made sense, but we've never corrected it. It's oversensitive at that point. And that's what happens. And the more we hear about it, the more we do it, the more the fear gets cemented in. And so that's why we have to be careful, okay, with that and realize what are some of these things. And the good news, we can change it. We're not hopeless. Michael Mockowitz, a leading expert on neuroplasticity, writes in his book, Neuroplastic Transformation, Your Brain on Pain. He's talking about chronic pain here. He says that we can change back the brain from trauma-induced limbic system impairment. He says this: neuroplastic transformation is the treatment that uses the basic principles of neuroplasticity to change the brain pathways back to normal function and anatomy. To accomplish this, we use thoughts, images, sensations, memories, soothing emotions, movement, and beliefs to harness the power of the brain. By learning principles of how our brain works, we can begin to use the conscious part of our brain to modify the experience of our lives. Man, when I first read that, I was so excited because I said, that's exactly what we're doing here. That's exactly what we're teaching in this class. How to use our thoughts and images, sensations, memories, soothing emotions, and beliefs to change who we are. And so it's really exciting. It's exciting to see how we can do that. Well, there's different kinds of reactions that we can have to these non-secure attachments. There can be physical, right? When I'm triggered emotionally, it may cause all kinds of emotions. And when this emotion is deep-seated and seemingly dangerous, right, to the mind, right, it sets off the amygdala alarm and the sympathetic nervous system comes on. And that's that fight and flight, right? All the blood, gets, the cortisol pumps through the body and adrenaline, and we get the upper body, gets ready, the legs get ready if we're going to run or whatever. And so it causes all kinds of things. And that's fine. When the danger's over, we should go back. But if you're, for example, like a people pleaser like I was, then everywhere you go, you're wondering about whether it's dangerous. It's like a predator in a room. Am I going to please people? Is someone going to be upset with me? What do I got to do right? Boy, I better not do something wrong, right? And it's this hyper-vigilance, and that can cause all kinds of problems. And many of us are running around anxious. We have this low hum going on all the time, and it can cause all kinds of physical issues. It can cause, lower back issues, a muscle ache, headaches, all kinds of heart issues, and chemical sensitivity and other kinds of things. And so we can see that there can be physical problems. There can be emotional, of course. We can have a depressive kind of pessimistic spirit. Our emotional pain comes in the form of feeling down and helpless, defeated and pessimistic, right? Why not escape, right? And we can have a sense of shame. That's worse even sometimes, I think, than being depressed. I feel that there's something wrong with me. There's a dread, a combination of anxiety and depression. A fear of non-being perhaps comes over me. I must divert my attention and escape. Maybe for others it's a deep-seated rage, an anger that's going on. And we're not sure why, but we have these outbursts and we overreact, and we need to work on it. And my point is, a lot of these things then cause us to want to escape, and we can escape through all kinds of things. Have an acronym for it, ESCAPE, right? E for excitement, S for substance, C for comfort, A for avoidance, P for people, right? E for emotionalism, and S for sex. We can overindulge in all those things, and we can become addicted, right? That's where addictions come from. And there's even spiritual issues, right, that can go on. We get anxious, depressed, hopeless, and we strive to connect. We look for what? Spiritual solutions. But unfortunately, sometimes we look for inward advisors, right? Outward spirits, enlightenment, inspiration, guardians, ancient wisdom, asceticism, all kinds of new age type things going on. There's a lot of spiritualism out there. But God, He wants us to follow Him. He wants us to come to Him. And what results a lot of times is a spiritual attack of deception or the creation of negative mental strongholds. And it's interesting, Pascal, who is a famous scientist, once said there's a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man that cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God, the Creator, made known through Jesus. And when we are in emotional pain and we are looking for a spiritual answer, none satisfies, we'll find ourselves seeking again to escape. And then there's behavioral issues. We want to escape behaviorally from this emotional pain, and we can do all kinds of things to ignore or snuff out or overcompensate, drug out, all those things that keep us from that emotional issues. And so that's what we do. We tend to escape, and it can get us into a lot of things. Well, once we start to see that we can escape this kind of thing, then what happens? The brain becomes adjusted to it. It gets primed, if you will. The striatum, that part that creates, pumps out the dopamine, it gets primed. And so, you might see a sexually alluring ad on TV or a piece of cake in a restaurant, hear the ice cube ringing inside an empty glass, a person who has excited us in the past, whatever, and we feel this small rush of dopamine. And right then, in our mind, we interpret the arousal to stimuli for the need for comfort or escape, whatever it is. And at that point, if we're going to overcome it, we need to pause. We need to understand what's going on. We get aroused, though, and we think we need to follow through on the illegitimate action, whatever it is, even though we know it ends up with guilt and pain. Why? Because we interpret it as a need. It feels just like the need for comfort that we felt throughout our life. I've counseled many people in addictions, and a guy would tell me, I took my first drink at 10, and for the first time I felt normal. There was a chemical reaction going on. There was a dysregulation in the brain, and because of that, the substance helped, and other forms of escape. And we need to see that sooner or later we're reacting to the need for the substance, and we need to get away and break away, whatever it is. And we can. Today there's hope. We can do that, and we'll talk much about that throughout the course. And then, there's the false beliefs about ourselves. There's not only the physical, right, craving that's going on, the brain reacting, but there's also the false beliefs about ourselves that cause this nagging concern in our life, that causes us to panic and feel anxiety and feel those things. And like I said earlier, there's a lack of spiritual direction and connection. And so what happens then, it causes us to continue down that negative road. Well, what can we do about that? What can we do about these negative attachments? What can we do about this attachment style that causes us to worry, to be anxious, to be angry, to be depressed, to seek all kinds of forms of escape? Well, today there's hope, friends. We can change. And I have some things listed for you. I call it name, blame, and change the game. First, we need to name it, right? The emotional pain or craving is faulty wiring. It's faulty wiring. It's an aberration. It's based on a false lie, right? A lie, a false signal. We don't need comfort from a lie. We need truth, right? We can return to joy anytime in this process. If we can name it, we can tame it. If we can say, hey, for example, I'm feeling anxious, and it's because I feel that, no one loves me, that I'm unlovable. Well, I've named it. Well, is that true? I feel that way, but does that mean it's true? No. And so I start to realize what the truth is. You see, I can change it. I can change it. But the trick is it needs to be emotionally believed. A person that feels that they're ugly and yet they're handsome or beautiful, they believe that emotionally. Try changing their mind. You can say, well, look, you're beautiful. Just say it 100 times. That won't help. Somewhere they learn that emotionally. We need to get back to that place and show them how wrong that was. That was a childhood belief. That was an immature belief. And the mature belief is that I'm good enough. That I'm good enough. And they can come to that place. And so, we need to put the blame where it is, right? It's due to this false lie, the lies about ourselves, the lies about life and that. And we need to get in touch with those, those things that came out of that young, immature life of ours where we weren't able to blame our parents. We weren't able to think rationally. We were thinking emotionally. And we started to believe that something was wrong with us. And so we changed the game. We start to realize, hey, I'm here now. It's been 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I don't have to continue to believe that. I don't have to continue to feel that way. We don't need false comfort. And so we can change some of those things. We need to know the truth. And so I've put in the back of the lesson a memory jogger, a journal that you can do. And the point of that is to just help you see different stages in your life and just reflect. Was there trauma? Was there things going on? Not that you have to do a deep dive, but sometimes just remembering some of these things will help free us because we can see them instead of being there. We can see them from a more mature vantage point. We can see it as an observer. We can see it as a mature observer. Oh yeah, I remember when Dad did that. And I remember when my brother did that. I remember at school when this happened. Just remembering it from a more logical, safe place will help the amygdala realize it's not that dangerous, that the assumptions we made may have been wrong. And so bringing some of it into awareness is important. And so I encourage you to look at the memory jogger. Start doing this over the next week and weeks to come, just to get a little familiar with some of the things that went on in your life so we can understand some of the things we believe. And so as we learn some of that stuff, we can ask God to help correct some of the things. We can start sharing our stories. You know, a lot of times we need to have a sense of coherence. And as we share with some, I remember when my dad did this, and we're more mature now telling it, we can have a better perspective, a sense of coherence of what was going on. And just correcting that can help us. And so you can also ask God to help and shine spiritually into some of those places. And then, you know, in the future, we'll talk more about this. I have it in your notes so we can go back to a memory. That's part of the emotional relearning that we talk about. We can go back into a memory. But the main thing is that we eventually want to know the truth, that we are lovable, that we are okay, that we are safe, that God does love us, that we're forgiven. Whatever it is that we need to know, whatever that truth is, that will change us. And the belief about how God loves us, right, is He reparents us. And then as we, you know, validate that new truth, and we could do that through affirmations, we can visualize the new truth, we can change our story and start telling others, and relationally start learning it. As I tell you that I'm starting to feel that I'm lovable, and you don't freak out, right? You sit there and go, well, yeah. You know, we're matching up, our neurons are firing back and forth, the mirror neurons, and I'm starting to feel like you're happy to be with the real me, that I can be who I really am, that God created me who I am to be, and that, I'm telling you, is exciting. Well, who are we then? I encourage you to go to the back of this lesson. I have a bunch of spiritual insight, a bunch of different scriptures of who we are in Christ. And I think it's important to start saturating your mind with that, because we're going to challenge some of those negative beliefs. We're going to challenge some of those things that came out of these non-secure attachments. And so, you know, I'm a new person with a new life. I live in grace without condemnation. I'm a friend of God. Christ helps me live. God gives me victory. I mean, on and on. I have a lot there that you can take and start meditating on. And then go over the group discussion questions. Well, we're starting now to look at some of the non-secure attachments. We're going to go more into it, and this will help us then understand, why do I feel the way I do? Why am I thinking some of the things? And the good news is, we're then going to learn how to correct them. So stay with us, continue to do all the work, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.